Welcome back to another episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy. And today we are lucky enough to have Konstancja Wozniacka on the podcast. And she is the policy advisor at Shellfish. And we're really excited to have her on the show today because she will be speaking about a report that Shellfish recently released, which is called Nutrient Removal by UK Bivalve Aquaculture, Case Studies and Considerations. So with Konstancja, we go through the report, all of the interesting findings, what are the new considerations that they've learned about bivalve aquaculture in the wake of this report, and the implications for the UK and more broadly speaking outside of the UK as well.
Before we get into that conversation, as always, remember if you want to contact the podcast for any reason, you can do so by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast. We are on social. You can follow us on Instagram at Seafood Alliance.
And if you enjoy this episode, the best way to show your support for us is by leaving us a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on.
We'll see you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
Konstancja, thank you so much for joining Maddie and I on the Aquademia podcast. How are you today?
Good, and thank you for having me here. It's really exciting to see an interest in this work that I'll talk about today, and to be part of this podcast, which I've listened to before. It's really exciting for me as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being a listener.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on today.
Yeah. So we're going to kick things off like we usually do with you introducing yourself to our guests. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you currently do?
My background is in marine biology. I've also studied fishery science actually as well. For the past few years, I've been fully immersed though in the world of aquaculture. Outside of my PhD work on aquaculture, I was an ecosystem services researcher at Shellfish, where I specifically focused on the ecosystem services provided by commercially important bivalves in the UK. That's a very lengthy bit here, but it's focused mostly on mussels and oysters, which are quite important. And I've also moved on to a different role right now. I'm policy advisor for bivalves, still at Shellfish as well.
So given your background in marine biology and fishery science, what is it that drew you to first look at the idea of shellfish aquaculture through the lens of ecosystem services?
What attracted me in the beginning to this work and this project was this combination of food production, but something else on top of it that makes it more and maybe more sustainable or more beneficial, and how it all interacts together. The project itself, it first started quite a while ago. It was commissioned by one of the working groups that Shellfish is involved in. And the premise was to look into how bivalves contribute to nutrient removal and what could be the monetary value of that services, to give it that extra context. And so that's why we looked at blue mussels, the Pacific and the native oysters and Manila clams, because of that commercial cultivation that we have. And I think it's also very important, and I'll take this moment to give a shout out to all the other researchers and people who supported this project along the way, the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Belfast. We also have tremendous support from now retired scientists from NOAA, Susan Bricker, and also from Longline Environment Ltd in the UK. And so many other researchers that responded to emails, so many growers as well who supported this work, who were their case studies. And you ask why I was interested when I started, but also this is why it kept going. There's so many people that were involved, excited, and contribute so much time. It was a really very, I think, valuable work.
That's such a great important point. I'm sure that so much work and so many different perspectives went into this report. So, one thing that Justin and I were interested to learn about when thinking about this report was, were there any gaps in the research or understanding that you were hoping to address with the report? Like, was there something that you noticed or that a problem that someone else brought up that you were like, this is something that could really use a serious look from inquiring minds?
Very good question. And the reason why this started was because there was a gap that someone identified, that there wasn't a quantification of those ecosystem services of mussels, of oysters, of bivalves in general in the UK to answer those questions. In general, the subject has been alive for quite a while, but it's a slow progress, building all the evidence. So what we, with this work, tried to elucidate is what is the level of removal, but also the potential monetary value. How can this be even assessed? What are the challenges also in further implementing that? What are the practicalities of this? And there's some research, some great research on the nutrient content of different bivalves, but not everything is from the UK. So that is a bit of a evidence gap that needs to be addressed still, and I hopefully will be in the future. That's just one example for that.
Obviously, we're talking about nutrient removal. I want to focus on that specifically. So for any of our listeners that may not be familiar with that concept, what exactly does nutrient removal mean in the context really of bivalve aquaculture, and why is it becoming such an important topic?
I think because I'm a marine biologist a bit at heart still, I will go from the top, I think, here. And, our coastal and marine waters, are a key source of ecosystem services. So the direct and those indirect contributions provided by this natural environment benefit us. And one of the key challenges to marine ecosystem health is eutrophication, the result of excess nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus, which are mainly the ones discussed, that reach the coastal waters and disrupt the natural ecological balance. And this can have a cascade negative effect on the natural nutrient cycles. Or oxygen levels in the water, for example, anoxic conditions. Light levels change that reach the seabed. It affects seagrasses, seaweed, fauna species in the area as well. So nutrients are quite important in that. And bivalves play an important role in nutrient removal because they consume algae, detritus, and they improve water clarity because they're natural filter feeders. They feed on algae and suspended organic matter from water. And with that, they get those excess nutrients out as well. So a proportion of these nutrients is assimilated. So it's built into their tissue and shell as they grow. And that is then removed when you harvest them. So that's where Bivalve aquaculture comes into place, because you're removing those nutrients in the mussel or the oysters or the clam outside of the water column. So that's how it works in terms of the nutrient removal.
So you mentioned eutrophication, and I know that there are an increasing number of nutrient pollution issues today. And I'm curious if you could, just to give us a little bit more context, what are some of the problems that coastal ecosystems are facing today, particularly in the UK? Like, why is this research so important in helping solve those problems?
As I mentioned, eutrophication impacts on the entire ecosystem in the water. It affects seagrasses that are nurseries for other species that keep the environment also healthy. It can affect fisheries because excessive nutrients can lead to eutrophication, but also blooms of harmful algal species, which can impact then specific industries or tourism as well, our well-being, our appreciation of nature as well, the quality of the water that we want to go into and perhaps bathe in. So I think that's why it's important to look into the ways of removing nutrients. they are a natural part of life. They are everywhere. They are building blocks of life. But as anything, in excess, it can cause problems. And it's also very difficult to manage those because there's point sources and there are non-point sources. It's hard to manage and tackle it all. So it's good to look into alternative ways or additional ways that we can do to support those efforts to reduce the amount of nutrients reaching our waters or reduce the amount that's already there, for example. And on that front, why is it important? And I find it, as again I said, exciting that it highlights the dual benefits of bivalve farming. It's not only about the valuable food resource, but it's also about maintaining healthy marine environment. So that's what aquaculture, I think bivalve aquaculture could bring together. And there are also other aspects of it, not only nutrient removal, but there's research that indicates that they can support the recovery of benthic habitat or increase in biodiversity, depending on the method that you're using to grow those bivalves. So there are many aspects of it that can work together, and I think that's what also was important and exciting to look into those.
Yeah, I think that's like the crux of what this research is saying, is this intersection of two really beneficial things for ecosystems, which is producing food for people and other animals, while also providing environmental services at the same time. And both of those things can be accomplished through shellfish farming and bivalve aquaculture. Yeah. So as a result of this research and this new qualification system, how should we think about bivalve aquaculture differently than we traditionally have?
I find this is a tough question, I think, to answer, because how do we think about bivalves or bivalve aquaculture traditionally? It really will depend on where you're from. And I realize people could be thinking about that depending on the way they were brought up or introduced to bivalve aquaculture. I personally, for example, that's something that I associated with a summer or holiday food. And it was, bivalves, and then learning about aquaculture is like, okay, that's that. And it was until later, when I got more involved in this way, that I realized of the complexity of how this works and of the system and what other things are there to think about. I found it interesting that they can be bioindicators of water quality. And that's something that sometimes we're not aware of. And I think this is pretty neat. So part of it, to not look traditionally, so to speak, is to look wider, to look broader here. And also looking past just the food production lens, we can look not only at the yields, the costs, but also the other benefits the sector could provide. As I mentioned before, they can support the ecosystem, the water quality. They have lower environmental footprint. They can, aquaculture can relieve pressure on wild shellfish, on wild bivalve stocks. That's one thing as well. It has deep historical roots, It can support sense of community, environmental stewardship, really, on in the community that you're in, if you are, for example, a grower. So I think those are other aspects to look into it. It's just not as food, but as so much more. So for me, that looking differently means taking a step back, and looking at all the different benefits, all the different caveats of that bivalve aquaculture can provide by supporting healthy marine ecosystems, how it interplays with water quality, how it interplays with culture. And that's the sort of perspective we could have in the future, I think.
Do you think that recognizing this report and the values of what bivalves bring could change really the public perception of shellfish farming?
I think it's all a gradual change. People take time to, people need time to learn, to find out more. We also need more time to provide more information, and it's a gradual process. It's perfectly fine to associate it with food, but I think a lot of people, certainly I think I see amongst my peers, they are interested in what else their food does, what it means when they eat it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will be an important aspect in the future of how we look at it and how people become more open to it. It's also depends on the country. Some places, some countries are bigger bivalve eaters. They are more hooked on mussels or oysters than others. I'm not myself personally from a seaside town. I wasn't raised there. But I remember in my family, we always spoke of seafood as something really exciting to eat. And that really depends on that. So I think educating early on about seafood in general is very important as well for our nutrition as well, because they are very healthy.
I think it ties back a little bit to the change that we've seen over the last several years of people paying more attention to the food they eat. It's no longer, I mean, everyone, I'm sure if you just spoke to someone on the street about a benefit of seafood, someone would just say, well, it's just good for you. But it's become more evolved than that now. Now people are asking so many more questions. And I think just by people asking those questions and doing that research, they're going to find out more. Like all the things that we already understand because we're in the industry is now becoming more general knowledge within the public.
Right. Yeah. It's not just about nutritional value anymore.
Right.
So this information about environmental impact is hugely important as people want to learn more about where their food is coming from.
Personally, myself, or I find it nice that when I buy mussels, for example, or some other bivalve to eat for dinner, I feel like I know to some degree, because there's so much more to learn still, but I know what's going on with it and some other aspects of it. And I think it gives me a bit of boost at my dinner when I know more about the food that I eat.
Yeah.
And I think it's exciting, and obviously raises a lot of conversations during dinner time with family and friends. Did you know? I'm sure they're all bored with that. But this is the sort of thing.
So we've talked a little bit about the context of like why people should be interested in this information about bivalve aquaculture, but let's get into the actual report itself. So the report contains a few different case studies which covered a very different farming operations across the UK. So you had some offshore mussel farms, some smaller oyster farms. What were some of the most interesting differences that you observed between the sites or between farming methods or the different species?
On that front, I would also like to highlight that whilst we are today talking about the report with the case studies that was released recently, there is also a preceding work to that all looked at the UK as a whole. That's also an interesting piece of work I recommend having a look at. But yes, it's very interesting indeed to look at the differences in nutrient content between the methods and the species, because that will have an impact. We ourselves haven't conducted research on the nutrient content in different species in terms of the chemical analysis of it. This is something that was done in the past, and hopefully more will be done in the future. There is a very interesting piece of research in the UK that highlighted the difference in mussels specifically. They were looking at blue mussels and the difference in shell and tissue content of nutrients depending on the cultivation method, also on the time of the year, for example, on other aspects like salinity, for example, or the location where the farm was. And one of the key findings was that nutrient removal can vary between culture systems. And for example, the variation in the nitrogen and phosphorus content of blue mussels indicated that the rope-grown mussels were found to have more nitrogen in tissue and shell per ton of the live bivalve compared to the bottom-cultured ones. There is also dependency on the size. Bigger ones hold more. So it's all factors into those calculations, and when you're trying to estimate, species will differ. From the research that was done previously as part of the GAIN project, the mussels remove more in terms of the percentage content than oysters, for example. So it all factors into when we are calculating, when you're harvesting, how much are you actually removing. And this is why higher nutrient removal were associated in our report with mussel farms compared to oyster farms, because just the sheer volume of production, for example, is higher there. And it compounds as well with the higher content in the mussel tissue and shell. And this, of course, then applies to the potential monetary value, which is proportionate to the nutrient removal at the site that you're looking at. So it's really depends on it was really variable. That's one of the things in the report, I think, and a lot of people would like a very clear, strict answer. This is that, but there's a lot to consider and a lot of variability, and that's why there is need for way more research as well to cover those gaps. But I hope there is lots of interest in this work, so I hope this will continue. That would be really good. I would be really excited to see more work on that.
So I'm sure that there's so much variability, like location to location, and then also like year to year, like environmental conditions have a huge impact. So could you talk a little bit about how local environmental conditions could influence the nutrient removal performance? Like, does a storm have any impact on that, or is it more like longer term things?
Certainly, a storm can have an impact, because if you are experiencing storm, you might experience higher mortality, for example. So your production and hence your removal will decrease. If you have a heat wave that causes mortality, again, similar situation, you will not be able to harvest as much as you hope for. You might lose a lot of stock, and that also impacts that removal. There is research, and there is a need for more research if the environmental conditions affect the content and how this plays long term and short term in terms of that content. There will have to be some sort of future calculators in a way to really establish it, to look at those differences. But there is definitely an impact. If the method matters, the environment, the location matters, the species matter. So that's the short of it, so to speak.
So the report discusses both the environmental and financial value of nutrient removal. What did you learn when comparing shellfish aquaculture to, say, wastewater treatment or other nutrient mitigation methods?
So first of all, those are not equal methods of water treatment. Those are not the same, obviously. And it's not that one replaces the other, or one is better, or some such. It of course matters first to limit the amount of nutrients getting to the water. Sometimes it's challenging to avoid, especially in diffuse sources of nutrients in the water. So other alternative options to traditional means, like bivalves in this case, could be useful for those places with high risk of eutrophication. We looked to those other methods to see what would be the potential monetary value, because we can talk about the amount of nutrients removed. There is a difference between the sites in terms of the amount of nitrogen or phosphorus removed. So it's hard to compare. Some bigger sites will remove more, some smaller sites will remove a few kilograms, for example, or a bigger site can remove maybe a ton or more nitrogen, for example. But it's hard to imagine those numbers. It's hard to see what's the value, what's the impact, what does this really mean? And that's why we try to look into the financial context to see, okay, can we provide extra information to understand the value of that? Outside of, okay, we are removing this set amount of nitrogen, this is how it works. How much does it, for example, cost to remove the same amount of nitrogen or phosphorus if you go through the traditional method of water cleaning? And that's why we looked at those traditional means and how much they cost. And it's really, even among the water companies, for example, the costs will differ. again, a source of variability. It depends on the method, on the location. Electricity costs also factor into that as well, the permitting conditions. So it's also quite variable. So in the report, you will see that the ranges are quite substantial, compounded obviously by also the potential differences in their removal. So it's still good to look at these estimated average costs to contextualize the value of nutrient removal offered by bivalves, but we have to be mindful of those wide ranges. It's also, I think, quite important to keep in mind where it might be most useful. Some areas might experience more nutrient pressure, and it will be more valuable for those areas to have that extra support, for example, from Bivalve Aquaculture. At the same time, it actually might not align well with Bivalve Aquaculture, with growing organisms commercially there. It might not work. And some places might not have a problem with eutrophication, and for them, that extra added value is not as important. So it's all about balancing that as well. I think that's really important to keep in mind. It's not a fix-it-all solution. It's part of it, and it's also important to be mindful of where and how this could interact properly with the local, on the local level.
Do you think that nutrient credit trading or like payment for ecosystem services programs are realistic for bivalve aquaculture? Or is that like so far beyond where we're heading?
You know what? It's difficult to say, I think, if it's a long way away or if it's realistic, because there are the limited number of examples right now in practice. But there is one, for example, the Chesapeake Bay program's best management practice that focus on reducing nutrient pollution through conservation and technological measures. And they also looked into nutrient reduction potential of oysters. And now there is a calculator in place. There is a system to use oysters to trade nutrient credits. That's a great example, and of course that's something to strive to in a way. But depending on the location, it's going to take a while to get there. Other nutrient credit trading programs, they are still, there are things to work out, and there has to be the confidence that it works and how to work it, and there has to be desire to collaborate to put it in place. So it requires a lot of input from a lot of bodies, a lot of individuals to make it work. I think this is something to look up to, the holy grail in some way, if you let me call it that. But it's a bit of a journey to get there. For sure. It really depends if there is enough push for it, enough interest, and also desire for people to pay to use this method. And so it still balances, the food production aspect and the environmental service aspect. Otherwise, you can just be talking about one or the other sometimes. And what I think is exciting is combining those two.
I think we've touched on this quite a bit, but maybe we can expand a little bit more on one of the reoccurring themes in the report is that shellfish aquaculture is not, I'm going to use air quotes that none of our audience can see, a silver bullet. But it could still play a meaningful role in water quality management. What do you think realistic expectations should look like?
It's not a silver bullet. It's not a fix-it-all solution to excess nutrient levels or nutrient concentrations in coastal waters. But not many things are a silver bullet, are they? Right. I think this is something to keep in mind. It could support traditional nutrient reduction efforts, especially, as I said, in the areas that really needed, that have eutrophication, for example, where managing non-point sources is difficult. It really would require a good, pilot study, something on local or regional example, showing how it can work on larger scales in the UK, for example, how it's quantified, how the content is quantified, how the removal is measured, calculated, who pays, who has to pay, or who would like to pay, how much, what the value of that. It's a lot of little things to work not really little, so to speak. It's just a list of all those things that have to be worked out to make it work. And, a committed collaboration, it requires regulators, authorities, the growers, researchers to come together and put a lot of time and effort to make this work. And what I've learned as part of this work, it was really amazing. I was able to speak to a lot of experts in the field who have been working on similar things for quite a while. And they say that it just requires a lot of commitment, to make sure that, as you see, it's a very long journey, and that you stay motivated and you see the value outside of credit trading, for example, the supporting the bivalve aquaculture sector, making people understand the value of it. There are other aspects of it, not only the financial, but other things related to understanding how this works that can be beneficial for bivalve aquaculture as a whole. So this is how I see it realistically. It's a long journey and lots of variability to tackle in terms of how much we estimate. I know I'm looking at it also from like research perspective, quite technical, but there are other challenges as well that are faced or that the industry is facing, and also looking into ecosystem services, there also would be challenges of how this even works, right?
Talking about how the findings from this report are that bivalve aquaculture has so many benefits to it, are there any risks that you can see in overselling bivalve aquaculture as a climate or water quality solution? Like, are there any risks in talking about it so highly that then it's taken up more?
A lot of things in excess can cause some problems. That's why we're quantifying things. We need to look into how much it's moving so we understand the process and we don't overestimate the benefit of it. This is really important. It's really easy to go down maybe a pessimistic route as well on this, but it is important to not oversell how beneficial it could be, that it will be all the same everywhere. This is why we're always having to look into how different species differ, how methods differ. So a lot of research to help address that worry that this might be a bit that we are doing, for example, too much on that. So this is how I think I see it.
Yeah, and I think overselling it would be difficult in that this report talks about this, right? It's not that shellfish farming doesn't come with its own issues, right? So the report specifically highlights some of those barriers that face the shellfish sector, which would include things like seed availability, market access. You have labor you have to think about, water quality classifications, in this case, post-Brexit challenges. So thinking about that, how do these industry pressures really affect the sector's ability to expand its environmental impact?
You listed a lot of those, yes, definitely, that we talked about. If the growers do not have reliable access to seed, or there is not enough labor, or there is not a strong market demand, it becomes very difficult to expand. If you decide to grow more bivalves because you're trying to improve the nutrient removal, you might risk producing more than you're able to sell, and that will affect the price on the market, and that will have a negative effect on the sector, which you wouldn't want. That's exactly the opposite, really. So those are those caveats of too much or not enough, and growers are conscious of how much they can produce to be able to sell, and what's their capacity, both environmentally and also labor-wise, for example. Water quality classification has also effect on when and where shellfish can be harvested. So these factors create a lot of they are the controlling factors, really, in terms of how things can expand. Growers understandably also would want to grow in clean, suitable waters. So not all locations will equally benefit, as I mentioned earlier.
Right.
But there's also the bigger question, so to speak, in how would this, outside of aquaculture of it, how would this fit into water quality improvement schemes, Like, how would this affect consumer confidence, for example? That's something to consider for sure. There are people have traditional, as you say, view of shellfish, of seafood sometimes, and there are sometimes worries about it. And it's important to ensure good communication, clear messaging, clarity on what this means. And it's part of all the other challenges that looking into how aquaculture would fit with those ecosystem services if we wanted to really like implement it, where what's there, proper or verify, let's say, removal assessment, what sort of framework, how would this work together, where would be most useful. All sorts of things need to be looked into, and that's why it takes a while to work all those. I mean, in any other nature-based solution, you would experience similar questions, practicality issues, and things you have to work out. So that's I think universal, isn't it, for every other new venture approach to those sorts of things. But it's important, isn't it? Because those problems, the eutrophication, for example, it affects so many places, and it's always
It's not just the UK; it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and it's important to look into all of the options in the portfolio, all the cards that we could play here. Not everything will work equally, not everything will work at all, but I think it's important to look into it, you know.
I love that perspective. I think that is so important, and we need more people thinking like that as climate change continues to intensify. So thank you for having that valuable perspective.
I say that being trying to make small steps or lots of small improvement places can really be important, and not everything will be this silver bullet, as you've put it earlier. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth it at all. Of course, it's a mass balance situation. You have to look if it's worth in this situation, in this case study. But it's not something to say completely, that doesn't work, for example, or that's too challenging.
After spending so much time researching this topic, what gives you the most optimism about the future of bivalve aquaculture and nutrient remediation?
I wonder if it was clear throughout this podcast today, actually, because what really I think is exciting and optimistic is the ways that this could go, all the directions. So I think the combination of ecosystem services and food production from the Bivalve Aquaculture, and together, we know, with the low environmental footprint, isn't that an attractive combination, right? So there is a lot of work ahead in terms of Bivalve Aquaculture nutrient remediation, but I think that this unique mix will lead and sustain a continued interest, because it's been decades since the idea was proposed, but there's still interest pushing research forward. Of course, I can say that this is slightly subjective, because as you said, I've been researching this for a while. I've been surrounded by people who also research similar things, and that enthusiasm is infectious in some way. But it's not only nutrient remediation, you know. It's depending on the type of aquaculture, you know, it can do other things. It can have other ecosystem services. It can be part of the byproducts, can be used for other sectors, for example. So there are other things, other services that are still not fully understood, not fully measured, not fully quantified. So the number of opportunities and the forms of research and inclusion of bivalve aquaculture that it can take is that source of optimism, I think, and excitement. You know, how can we look at this differently? How can we look at bivalve aquaculture differently? You know, taking that step back and having this wider perspective. And this is also why I think this work, this report underscores it's important to look into ecosystem services within the seafood production and how it supports environmental health, economic sustainability, and just having that wider understanding, I think.
What do you hope policymakers, scientists, and even seafood producers take away from this report?
I hope that this report sparks some conversations, some discussions, that researchers, for example, take it further, that they build on it. This is a piece that can be, I think, a source of some sort of inspiration for further work. It highlights the challenges. So where else could research go? And everyone else, the growers can have a look at it as well and say, this is good. People should be aware of other aspects of it's just not just food. What else is there? What else it needs to be known? I think there are lots of initiatives right now trying to promote aquaculture or shellfish aquaculture, bivalve aquaculture specifically as well, and educate people to bring clear messaging. And I think this can also help with that, so people have a wider understanding. And I think that's the important thing, to just make people aware. So when they make decisions in the future, they are conscious of that. Maybe they factor it in. Maybe that sparks them looking into something new, something fresh. I think that would be really good outcome of all this work that a lot of people put a lot of time into. And I think that would be really rewarding as well for this work to have that extra.
So as we wrap up this conversation, and now that this report has been released, I'm curious, what is next for you?
Oof, that's always one of those questions. I am still very much in the aquaculture world myself, and I hope that specifically that this work will continue, that I'll be able to hear about it, that people will reach out, maybe ask questions, maybe tell me about the work that they are doing that's similar. That's already happening. I'm still I hear about, this work will do something similar, or for example will benefit from that, or just looking into this direction. So I hope that's what's in store, that more of learning about the future of this sort of work.
If any of our listeners want to dive deeper, I'm going to use air quotes again. It's my thing. Where can our listeners find the report? How could they contact you? Any useful resources that you want to give to our listeners that I can link in the show notes?
Yes. So the report can be found on the Seafish website. Interestingly, also, if anyone is interested in Seafish, our annual plan, which details how we plan to best support the entire seafood industry across the next 12 months, is going to be released on Monday, the 15th of June, 2026, for those listening in the future.
Yeah.
So you will also be able to find that annual plan there. And if someone wants to reach out, I think you can always email me or through one of our contact points on the website, and it will be directed probably to me. So there is that. And we have social media on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on different social media platforms that you can follow the work that Seafish does in the seafood sector, and how we are there to, how we support it and ensure that it thrives.
Perfect.
So while you have the platform, is there anything else that you want to get out there to our audience?
I think once again, I will really, really like to highlight all the people that supported this work, the growers, of course, all the other researchers and different institutions, people who answered lots of questions about how to do it, all the experts that shared their experiences, their feedback, their suggestions, what they've learned whilst they were themselves working on similar things, that they had, time and patience to share all that with us. So I wanted to really, really just give them all a shout out. It's really appreciated. And I think do look into those sorts of things. Have optimism in some way and some curiosity about it. It might go many different ways, many different places. So I just hope that people, after using this moment, it's just that they are curious about it and they remember this And next time they reach for a bivalve on the shelf in the store, maybe this will spark, this is something I can think about whilst I'm enjoying my dinner.
Well, Constantia, thank you so much again for taking the time to walk us through the report and joining Maddie and I on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Great experience, and I really hope that will be part of many other exciting episodes in the future. So.
Well, we'll be keeping tabs on everything that's happening. If you're involved in another report, we're probably going to have you back on.
I would love that, and hopefully that will be something that we can do again in the future. Who knows? As
Absolutely.
I said, optimistic and excited about the different opportunities and different ways it could go.
Folks, that was our conversation with Constantia. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. As a reminder, if you want to contact the podcast, you can do so by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast. If you want to follow us on social, we are on Instagram at Seafood Alliance.
And the best way to stay in touch with us is by subscribing to Aquademia on your podcast platform of choice. So be sure to do that so that every episode gets downloaded directly to your device.
And we will see you at the next episode.
Bye.
Ciao.